The blue fabric of her dress caught on the fence as Ivy swung her leg over the horse, the material stretching tight across her body as she settled into the saddle. Her blonde hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, catching the morning light like spun gold against the faded blue cotton. 3 days without food had left her hands shaking, but desperation steadied her grip on the reins. Silas watched from the porch, his calloused hands resting on the wooden rail. The way she sat the horse told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't her first time stealing, but it was her first time being caught and allowed to continue. The confusion in her green eyes made something twist in his chest, a feeling he'd buried along with his wife 2 years ago. You planning to just sit there, or you got somewhere to be? His voice carried no threat, only curiosity. Ivy's head snapped toward him, blonde strands whipping across her face. I don't understand why you're doing this. Doing what? Silas stepped down from the porch, moving slowly like he might approach a spooked animal. Letting you take what you need? She shifted in the saddle, the blue dress riding up slightly on her thighs. Nobody lets people steal from them. There's always a catch. Silas studied her face, the hollow cheeks that spoke of hunger, the wariness that came from too many broken promises. Maybe I'm tired of keeping things I don't need. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. She'd prepared for anger, for pursuit, for violence. She hadn't prepared for this strange gentleness that made her feel more exposed than if he'd ripped the dress right off her body. What do you want from me? The question came out smaller than she intended. Nothing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, extending it toward her. Food money. Road gets long between towns. Ivy stared at the pouch like it might bite her. I can't. You can't what? Take help when it's offered? Something shifted in his expression, a shadow crossing his features. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't taking what you need. It's accepting what someone wants to give. She reached for the pouch, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, warm and unfamiliar. When was the last time someone had touched her without wanting something in return? Why? She whispered. Silas looked toward the empty house behind him, where sunlight streamed through windows that had seen too much silence. Because holding on to things that don't matter is easier than letting go of things that do. As Ivy tucked the pouch into her dress, she realized she was about to ride away from the first person in years who had looked at her like she was worth something more than what she could provide. But first, she needed to understand what he'd lost, that made giving feel easier than keeping. Ivy pulled the reins, stopping the horse just at the edge of his property. The blue dress had twisted around her legs during the brief ride, and she adjusted it while staring back at the man who still stood on his porch, watching her with those unreadable eyes. You lost someone, she called out, her voice carrying across the morning air. Silas went very still. What makes you say that? She turned the horse around, blonde hair catching the breeze. The way you look at that house, like you're seeing ghosts. Her fingers tightened on the reins. I know that look, because I see it in mirrors. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Silas walked toward her, his boots crunching on the dry earth. When he stopped beside the horse, he was close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't say. My wife, Clara, he said finally. Fever took her. Been 2 years now. Ivy felt something crack open in her chest. I'm sorry. She used to sit on this porch every morning, watching the road, always hoping someone interesting might come by. A bitter smile touched his lips. Guess she got her wish. Just 2 years too late. The weight of his loneliness settled between them like a physical thing. Ivy understood it intimately. That hollow ache that made you feel invisible even when people were looking right at you. She shifted in the saddle, the blue fabric pulling tight across her ribs. What about you? Silas asked, his eyes meeting hers. What put that look in your eyes? The question hit like a physical blow. Ivy's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, remembering hands that had taken without asking, voices that had promised protection but delivered only pain. The blue dress suddenly felt too thin, too revealing. Some things can't be stolen back once they're taken, she said quietly. Understanding flickered in Silas's expression. Who hurt you? Does it matter? She straightened, trying to rebuild the walls he'd somehow started to crumble. Past is past. Is it? He stepped closer to the horse, close enough that she could smell leather and soap on his skin. Because you're running from something. And whatever it is, it's got you stealing horses at dawn instead of asking for help. Ivy's breath caught. I don't ask for help. Because asking means trusting, Silas said, and the gentleness in his voice made her want to cry. And someone broke that trust real bad. She looked down at him from the horse, this stranger who saw too much and asked for too little. The morning sun painted everything golden, making the moment feel suspended in time. I should go, she whispered. You should, he agreed. But you don't want to. The truth of it settled over her like a second skin. She'd come here to steal what would help her survive another day. Instead, she'd found someone who made her remember what it felt like to want to stay somewhere. But wanting something and being brave enough to reach for it were two very different things. Ivy dismounted slowly, her legs unsteady as her boots touched the ground. The blue dress smoothed down around her thighs as she stood there, horse's reins still in her hand, staring at Silas like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. 3 days, she said suddenly. What? I haven't eaten in 3 days. Her blonde hair fell across her face as she looked down. Haven't slept somewhere safe in longer than that. Silas felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he thought had died with Clara. Kitchen's got eggs. Coffee's still warm. Ivy's head snapped up. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. She studied his face, searching for the catch, the hidden price that always came with kindness. But his eyes held only that same steady gentleness that had thrown her off balance from the beginning. People don't just feed strangers, she said. This people does. Silas reached for the horse's reins. I'll tend to him while you eat. As they walked toward the house, Ivy caught sight of herself in the window glass, blonde hair tangled, blue dress dusty and wrinkled, face too thin from hunger. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman with nowhere to go and nothing to offer. Why do you live out here alone? She asked, as Silas tied the horse to the porch rail. Peace and quiet. He opened the front door, gesturing for her to enter. Clara always said I was too much of a hermit, but after she died, he trailed off, looking around the empty rooms. Quiet's easier than conversation. The house felt suspended in time. Women's clothes still hung in the bedroom doorway. A half-finished embroidery project sat on the side table. Even the coffee cups in the sink seemed arranged for 2 people. You haven't changed anything, Ivy observed. Wouldn't know where to start. Silas moved toward the kitchen, his shoulders tight. Clara arranged everything just how she liked it. Felt wrong to mess with her work. Ivy followed him, the blue dress swishing softly around her legs. That's not living. That's just existing. The words hung between them like an accusation. Silas stopped moving, his hand frozen on the coffee pot. Maybe, he said quietly. But existing was easier than facing what came next. And what's that? He turned to look at her, this strange woman who'd tried to steal his horse and ended up stealing something much more dangerous. Learning how to want things again. The admission settled over them both. Ivy felt her breath catch as she realized what he was really saying, that she'd awakened something in him he'd thought was permanently buried. But before either of them could process what that meant, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from outside. Silas moved to the window, his face draining of color. You need to hide. Now. Ivy's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice shouting from outside. Ivy, I know you're in there. Through the window, she could see Marcus Reeves dismounting his horse, his cold eyes scanning the property. The same eyes that had looked at her like she was something to be owned, rather than loved. The same hands that had left bruises hidden beneath her blue dress. Who is he? Silas asked, but the protective edge in his voice told her he already understood. My husband. The word tasted like poison. Former husband. He's been tracking me for weeks. Silas moved between her and the door without hesitation. Stay behind me. Marcus's boots thundered up the porch steps. Silas Ward, send my wife out here and we can settle this peaceful-like. She's not your wife anymore, Silas called through the door, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from his shoulders. Law says different. Marriage contract's still legal, and she's got no grounds for leaving. Marcus's voice carried the arrogance of a man used to getting his way. She's my property, same as that horse she stole. Ivy felt herself shrinking, the familiar terror creeping up her spine. For weeks she'd convinced herself she was free. Now Marcus stood outside, ready to drag her back to a life that had slowly killed her spirit. I'm not going back, she whispered, but her voice shook. Silas glanced at her, taking in the way she'd wrapped her arms around herself. How the blue dress suddenly seemed like armor that wasn't nearly strong enough. Something fierce ignited in his expression. You don't have to, he said quietly. He won't just leave, Ivy warned. Marcus doesn't accept no for an answer. Then he's about to learn something new. Silas moved toward the door, his hand resting on the handle. Trust me? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Trust. The thing that had been shattered so completely she'd forgotten what it felt like. But looking at Silas, seeing the way he'd positioned himself between her and danger without a second thought, she felt something crack open in her chest. Yes, she breathed. Silas opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Marcus stood there, bigger than Ivy remembered, his presence filling the space with casual menace. Ward, appreciate you keeping her safe, but I'll be taking her home now. No, Silas said simply. Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. No? You think you got some claim on her? She's been warming your bed, has she? His eyes found Ivy through the window, and his smile turned cruel. Always was good at finding men to use. Ivy flinched, but Silas stepped forward, his body language shifting into something dangerous. You're gonna want to watch your mouth, Silas said, his voice quiet but loaded with promise. Or what? Marcus's hand moved to the gun at his hip. You'll fight me over used goods? The words hit Ivy like physical blows, but before she could crumble under their weight, Silas spoke again. No, he said, and something in his tone made both Ivy and Marcus go still. I'm gonna give you one chance to ride away. After that, we settle this permanent-like. The morning air crackled with tension as two very different kinds of men faced each other across a porch that had become a battleground. If this story is touching you in any way, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good Western tale, and subscribe to the Western Redemption channel. Every single day at exactly 10 a.m., a brand new story drops, packed with emotion, justice, and redemption. So turn on the notification bell and don't miss the next chapter, because out here in the West, no one waits around. Marcus's laugh was sharp and ugly. You think you're some kind of hero, Ward? This little whore ran off with money she stole from me. That makes her a thief and you an accomplice. Ivy's hands clenched into fists, the blue fabric of her dress pulling tight across her knuckles. The lie came so easily to Marcus, twisting her escape into theft, her desperation into criminality. That's not true, she said, stepping forward despite her fear. Shut your mouth, Marcus snapped, his mask of civility finally slipping. I'll deal with you at home. She's not going anywhere with you. Silas's voice cut through the tension like a blade. And if you threaten her again, we're gonna have a problem. Marcus studied Silas with calculating eyes, taking in the older man's weathered hands, the way he stood planted like a tree that had weathered too many storms to be easily uprooted. You're willing to die for a woman you just met? Marcus asked. If necessary. The simple honesty in Silas's voice made Ivy's breath catch. But you're the one who needs to decide if you're willing to die to drag her back to a life she doesn't want. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's features. He'd expected an easy retrieval, not a man willing to stand between him and what he considered his property. She's my wife, Marcus said, but some of the confidence had leaked out of his voice. Was, Ivy corrected, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. I left you, Marcus. I left because you hurt me, because you made me feel like nothing, because staying with you was killing me piece by piece. Marcus's face darkened. You think running to another man makes you free? You're still the same broken thing you always were. The words should have destroyed her. For months, she'd believed them. But looking at Silas, seeing the way he looked at her like she was worth protecting, worth choosing, she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe I was broken, she said, her voice growing stronger. But broken things can heal when they're treated with care instead of cruelty. Enough. Marcus's hand moved toward his gun. I'm taking her home. No, Silas said quietly. You're not. The standoff stretched between them, thick with the promise of violence. Ivy could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could taste fear bitter on her tongue. But underneath the terror was something else, a fierce determination not to go back to being the woman who flinched at shadows. This isn't over, Marcus said finally, his eyes promising retribution. Yes, Silas replied, his hand moving to rest casually near his own weapon. It is. Marcus backed toward his horse, his retreat careful, but definite. You can't protect her forever, Ward. I'll be watching, waiting. As Marcus rode away, Ivy realized she was shaking, not with fear this time, but with the overwhelming realization that someone had chosen to fight for her. But the danger wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ivy's legs gave out the moment Marcus disappeared from view. She sank onto the porch steps, the blue dress pooling around her like spilled water, her blonde hair falling forward to hide her face as silent tears began to fall. "He's right," she whispered. I am broken." Silas settled beside her on the steps, careful to leave space between them. "Being hurt doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. You don't understand." Ivy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I stayed with him for 3 years. 3 years of him telling me I was worthless, that no one else would want me. Part of me believed him. And now?" She looked at him through tear-dampened lashes. "Now I'm scared that he was right. That this, whatever this is between us, is just you feeling sorry for a damaged woman." Silas turned to face her fully, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Ivy's breath caught, but she nodded. "I see a woman brave enough to steal a horse when she was starving rather than beg. I see someone who recognized grief in a stranger and offered comfort instead of judgment." His voice gentled. "I see someone who stood up to the man who hurt her, even when she was terrified." "That's not brave," Ivy protested. "That's desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing." Silas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek. "Clara used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear." The touch was so gentle, so careful, that it made more tears fall. "I don't know how to trust this," she admitted. "Then don't trust it yet," Silas said. "Trust me instead." Ivy studied his face, the lines etched by sun and sorrow, the eyes that looked at her like she was precious rather than used. "Why? Why are you willing to risk everything for someone you just met?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the empty house behind them. "Because for 2 years I've been living like a ghost, going through the motions of life, without actually living." He looked back at her. "You reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting. And if Marcus comes back, if he brings the law, claims I stole from him, then we'll face it together." The certainty in his voice made something warm unfurl in her chest. "If you want to stay." The offer hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Ivy felt the weight of choice pressing down on her, the familiar safety of running versus the terrifying possibility of staying and building something real. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home," she said quietly. "Neither have I. Since Clara died." Silas's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Maybe we could figure it out together." As the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold and promise, Ivy felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. But even as she squeezed Silas's hand, accepting his offer, she couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wasn't done with them. Some men never learned to let go of what they considered theirs, and some battles were just beginning. 3 days passed in careful peace. Ivy helped around the ranch, her blue dress gradually replaced by simpler clothes that belonged to Clara, clothes that Silas offered without ceremony, and she accepted without shame. Her blonde hair caught the morning light as she fed the chickens, and Silas found himself watching her move through his space like she belonged there. But peace was fragile, and Marcus Reeves was not a man who accepted defeat. The attack came at dawn. Ivy woke to the smell of smoke and Silas shaking her shoulder roughly. "Fire," he said, already reaching for his boots. "Barn's burning." Through the window, orange flames licked at the morning sky. Ivy dressed quickly, her heart hammering as she realized this wasn't an accident. Marcus had found a way to strike without showing his face. Outside, the heat hit them like a wall. Silas ran toward the barn where his other horses screamed in terror, trapped by walls of flame. Without hesitation, he plunged into the smoke. "Silas, no!" Ivy screamed, but he was already gone. She stood frozen for a moment, watching the man who'd chosen to protect her disappear into deadly flames to save his animals. The same animals she'd once tried to steal. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come here to take something from him, and now she might lose everything that mattered. But she wasn't the same broken woman who'd crept onto his property 3 days ago. Ivy grabbed a bucket and ran to the well, pumping water with desperate efficiency. Again and again, she doused the flames spreading toward the house, her movements fueled by a fierce determination she'd never felt before. When Silas emerged from the barn leading 2 terrified horses, his face was black with soot and his shirt was singed, but he was alive. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. "The other horse?" she gasped. "Gone!" Pain flickered across his features. Smoke got him before I could reach him. As they worked together to contain the remaining flames, Ivy caught sight of a figure watching from the distant ridge. Even at this distance, she recognized Marcus's silhouette against the dawn sky. "He's watching," she said quietly. Silas followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "He's trying to break us down piece by piece, make us afraid. And if we run, leave together, he'll follow." Silas turned to face her, his soot-streaked face grim with resolve. "Running won't end this, Ivy. Some fights you can't avoid. You can only choose when and where to have them." As Marcus's figure disappeared from the ridge, Ivy understood. The fire hadn't just been destruction, it had been a declaration of war. And tomorrow, they would have to finish what Marcus had started. Marcus came at midday, when the sun was high and shadows were short. This time he wasn't alone. 2 men rode beside him, their faces hard with the promise of violence. Ivy stood on the porch in her simple brown dress, her blonde hair pulled back severely, watching them approach. Beside her, Silas checked his rifle one final time. "Last chance, Ward," Marcus called out as he dismounted. "Hand her over, and we ride away peaceful." "Same answer as before," Silas replied. "No." Marcus's smile was cold as winter. "Then you die for her. Your choice." The gunfight was swift and brutal. Marcus's men moved with practiced efficiency, but they hadn't counted on Silas's steady aim or Ivy's fierce determination. When one of the hired guns tried to circle around the house, Ivy met him with Clara's shotgun. Her hands steadied despite her racing heart. The decisive moment came when Marcus cornered Silas behind the water trough. As he raised his gun for the killing shot, Ivy appeared behind him. "Marcus," she said quietly. He spun around, and for a moment she saw something that might have been surprise in his eyes. She looked different, stronger, more certain. The broken woman he'd married was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned what it meant to be valued. "You want me?" she said, raising the shotgun. "Come and take me." Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You think you're better than me now? You think this rancher makes you worth something?" "No," Ivy said, her voice steady. "I make me worth something. I always did. You just convinced me I didn't." When Marcus raised his gun, she was ready. The shot echoed across the ranch like thunder. When the smoke cleared, Marcus lay still in the dust, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky that had witnessed his final cruelty. His hired men, seeing their employer dead, mounted their horses and rode away without looking back. Ivy lowered the shotgun, her hands shaking now that it was over. Silas appeared at her side, his own gun forgotten as he pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered against her hair. "Is it?" she asked. But even as she spoke, she felt the truth of it settling into her bones. Marcus was dead. The fear that had driven her for so long was finally, definitively finished. 6 months later, they were married in the small church in town. Ivy wore a new dress, white this time, instead of the faded blue that had marked her arrival. As they exchanged vows, Silas repeated the words he'd spoken that first morning, the ones that had started everything. "You forgot one thing," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "What's that?" she asked, though she already knew. "My heart," he replied, and kissed her as the sun streamed through the church windows, painting their new beginning in shades of gold and endless possibility. She'd come to steal a horse and found a home instead. Sometimes the best treasures were the ones you never knew you were looking for. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale, where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.